welcome to edition 97, part 4 of our Killa No Filla podcast with me, Rachel Fairburn and Kiri Pritchard-McLean. Just before we start, we'll do our usual disclaimer. This isn't hero worship. We do this podcast because we have mutual interest in serial killers. As long as we are doing this podcast, it stops us from writing some in prison.
This is the 4th part, is it?
Yeah, it's going to be 5 parts, isn't it?
Yeah. This is the 4th part of Charles Manson and the Manson family. But this is being recorded on New Year's Eve, the morning of, isn't it?
Yeah. The morning of New Year's Eve. It is 9:10 in the morning on the 31st of December 2022.
If you're listening to this, aliens have landed and the world is no longer our own. We're recording this from inside a cupboard.
As usual. I'm in a hotel in Brighton. Where are you? You're at home.
Have I talked about this? What's called the Chinese room?
Oh, sorry, are you some aristocrat?
Yeah, so this is all Ming Dynasty. Have I told you why it's called the Chinese room?
No.
Well,
is this where you eat Chinese?
It's the bar and grill.
Oh, great, yeah.
So it's known as my partner's surname, Bar and Grill, because it's his bar and grill. But because whenever we have a Chindian, which is when we get Chinese and an Indian, and the best of both bits, fusion, I believe it's called, and we sit down and we eat it in here because there's a proper table, and we'll all sit around and chat. When this company came round to give me a quote for heating, they did it by room, like how many radiators, where it would go. And they kept calling this room the Chinese room, and I was like, why are they calling that? What we would call the dining room, why are they calling that the Chinese room? And we realised it's because when they came round, what we do is when we have a Chinese is we always order too much, so we just leave it and then keep picking at it over the day, the next day.
Okay,
so there was just old Chinese strewn everywhere.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
And they called it the Chinese room. I was disgusted as that.
What absolute sliding.
This is the filthy slut room. This is the dirty toilet, and this is the 4 inches of dust spare bedroom.
This is the shit cabinet.
So funny.
Unbelievable. They're so rude, aren't they? The Chinese room. That's great. I love it. Pure shade being thrown there for no reason.
Yes, so funny.
If you want to leave your Chinese food open, you do that. I've got a craving now for a Chinese food or Indian. Oh, I've not had a good Indian for ages. But that's not what we're here for. Happy New Year. I'm in Brighton, doing gigs down here for New Year. Then I'm going to Dorset. You'll be in my home as well, won't you?
Yes, I'm going to be...
Yeah,
my brother is staying and looking after the animals and stuff. And I'm going down to London. I'm going to do a gig, and then I'm going to nip over to a friend's birthday party, which has a theme, which I feel like... Yeah, I love a theme to a party. I love fancy dress, but this is the theme I probably feel the most uncomfortable with because I don't know what I'm going to wear.
Okay.
It's a burlesque theme, and...
Wow.
I just don't think I have anything that is suitable. So I thought about maybe putting on like a big black coat and a white shirt and making a door badge for my arm and making it look like I work the door.
See, that's funny. I like that.
Yeah.
That would be one of my least favourite themes, that.
Yeah. Although weirdly, ironically, it's probably how we dress for most of the live shows for All Killa.
Yeah, but you know, it's different, isn't it? It's different when it's like dressing like that for a show. Because you get off stage and you just go, take it off, don't you? Put your jeans in not your jeans, your leggings in my case. I don't wear jeans, do you?
Very, very rarely.
I just can't be bothered anymore. It's too much effort. I used to wear jeans all the time and now I'm like, oh, fuck that shit. You can get changed easily, but I just think if you were all night dressed like that,
yeah,
wafting around, chatting, nah. I think yours is great. It's funny as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to see what I can put together today. I booked my train yesterday and got an email for it last night saying it was cancelled, so...
Oh, God, please don't. Please don't. The other day, I was never been so fucked off with myself in my life. I went up to Manchester to do a gig. Stayed for an extra day because there had been a strike, but then... there was railway engineering work, so I thought, you know what, instead of it taking me 5 hours to get home, I may as well just stay here, go and see my niece and all that kind of stuff. So, did that, and then I realised I'd forgotten my fucking house keys.
Oh, shit,
I'd left them in Lincolnshire where I was for Christmas, right? So the next day I was like, well, Tim was still in Lincolnshire. I was like, well, I've got to go and get these keys. I had to stop over. The train was delayed, cancelled and delayed. That took, to get from Manchester to Lincolnshire, took nearly 3 hours. Then I had to get off the train and collect my keys because Tim had dropped them off for me. And then it was another hour and 45 minutes back to London. And I was just like, can somebody just kill me? Why does the universe hate me? I've never forgotten my keys or lost my keys in my life.
No, you're very
and the
good.
one time I do it, it's, that scenario. But anyway, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Look after your keys. Hold them close.
I genuinely thought you said kids.
Oh, can you imagine if I just came out with something like that? I hope you've been enjoying these Manson things, because I'll be honest with you, I hate him. I absolutely hate the guy. I hate all of them, actually. I think they're all a bunch of snivelling little tossers. But I hope you got nice Christmas presents as well.
To people listening or me?
Well, anyone. You're a person who's listening. You're listening to me. Your Christmas present still hasn't arrived due to... I don't know if anyone knows this about the UK at the moment. It's a very 1970s experience, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The strikes, left, right and centre. I ordered a wolf fleece off Vinted, and that's taken over 2 weeks to even get a sniff of near the door. The person who sold it to me is very, very concerned.
I'm going to start ordering stuff for summer that I want to wear on eBay and stuff like that, because it's taken so long to get there. Solidarity, obviously, with all the striking workers. All this is the result of people making billions and billions and billions at the top and treating the people who work for them like shit.
Yeah, so happy Christmas and whatever the fuck it is now. New Year. I'm ready to get cracking in 2023. Let's move on.
Well, how
fun.
would you rate 2022 for you overall?
7.
Okay. Yeah.
What would you say?
I think... see, there were bits that were like a 4, and there were bits that were like 9s and 10s. So maybe an 8.5 overall.
It's all right, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although I don't agree with this, end of year, it's the end of the year, is my list of... I hate end of the year lists and, seagull. I hate end of the year lists and, the best 20 things of... I'm like, no, just reflect yourself. Don't be making these lists for people. Just, go, oh, well, there we go, bye, move on. It's just another day. But have a good one. Charles Manson. So where were we? Where did we leave the last episode?
We'd introduced the members of the gang who carry out the murder.
And we're going to get to the 2 murders. One of them more talked about than the other, which I find quite... Which is understandable in a way because of who it was, but just 2 really horrible, horrible, brutal murders. But there is one before the Tate LaBianca murders, isn't there?
Yes.
Who's this guy?
This is Gary. Gary Hinman. So Gary had a degree in chemistry and a PhD in sociology, and he was meant to be a very sweet man, very intellectual, and he lived in Topanga Canyon, and he used to basically have an open house. So he's from Colorado originally, born on Christmas Eve, 1934, and this house was anyone who basically needed a safe place to be, he would always let them in. Now, someone from the Manson family becomes his friend, because he had also been letting them stay, and then more and more Manson members came to stay, and he sort of just came on the family's radar. Now, he's a really brilliant musician, as well as everything else. He sounds incredibly clever, so he used to work in a music shop, and he would teach drums, trombone, bagpipes, and piano.
Ugh.
So, can you imagine much need for that in sort of like Beverly Hills, a bagpipe shop? I don't know. So
who knows? One of the worst sounds known to man.
I quite like them.
No.
So when he's about 34, he gets into Buddhism. So that's about 1968. And he would have been planning the year after, in 1969, to take a religious pilgrimage to Japan. But that was in the summer, and unfortunately he dies on July the 25th of 1965, so just before this pilgrimage, because what had happened is 3 of the Manson family, Bobby, Bosalil, and Susan Atkins and Mary Brunner came round because basically Charles Manson had convinced himself that Gary was incredibly rich and had stocks and bonds because he had a nice house, he had good cars, and Manson was like, well, let's just convince him to join the family because then he has to hand that over to me and then we can get more money. So he goes, right, you go over there, make him join the family and turn over everything he owns. So they went to him, and actually the way they sort of what they said to authorities years later, or much later, was that, we went to see him because he sold us some mescaline that was bad and we wanted a refund. So half of them say it was because they wanted to steal his stuff, half of them say it's because he was a dodgy drug dealer. I don't know what to believe, but I tell you...
Oh, so it was either theft or a consumer issue.
Yes. Watchdog.
Yeah, it was either Crime Watch or Watchdog.
But the whole thing lasts for like 3 days. So Charles Manson at some point with Bruce Davis just swings by, and they were sort of torturing him and sort of holding him ransom. So he arrives, and Charles Manson's got a sword, and he hits Gary Hinman in the head with it. So he slices his left ear and his face. And Gary's like, why are you doing this? Can you just go, please? He just didn't understand any of this, which makes me think he didn't sell them bad mescaline. And that they were just turned up and decided that they wanted what he had.
I wonder if they did that because they wanted him to give him drugs as well. The drugs.
Oh.
When he hadn't actually been giving him drugs.
Oh, interesting. What, they thought that he had drugs and they wanted some?
What was he? He had a pharmaceutical...
No, I mean, he was working in a music shop at the time. He just had a chemistry degree. He wasn't Walter White or anything.
I know, but I genuinely think, like... They probably wanted it. I don't think he was selling drugs, this lad.
No, I don't think so either. I think he might have bought some and given it to them, but it's not the same thing. I think it was an excuse.
Charles Manson's friends with biker gangs.
Yeah.
Why is this guy... He would be getting his drugs from the biker gangs.
Yeah. Yeah. So...
Yeah, he just wants money.
He just wants money. He's like, I don't understand why you're doing this. Can you just go? And Charles is like, yeah, fine, I will. And him and Bruce Davis just steal one of his cars and leave. So the others stay behind. That's Mary and Susan. Now they repair his face, but they stitch it together with dental floss because that's
God.
I know, all they could find there. I hope it wasn't minty as well. Imagine that. And Gary,
it most certainly was.
It's so horrible. Gary is just sat there like, I don't understand what's going on. And because he's a Buddhist, he doesn't believe in violence. He was like, can you please just leave? And thought that would sort of save him. But on the 27th, he's finally killed. Bobby Bosalil stabs him in the chest twice. And then Bobby and Susan and Mary take it in turns holding a pillow over his face until he stops breathing. Now, they use this murder as part of their staging for Helter Skelter, the apocalypse race war that they insisted was coming. So they take his blood, and Bobby writes political piggy on the wall with a paw print. Now, the paw print is meant to stand for the Black Panthers. And Piggies, which is a track on the White Album, Charles Manson was obsessed with because he thought Piggies were members of the establishment. And in fact, the song Piggies, it says that they need a damn good whacking in it. And Manson would frequently quote that and would refer to whacking people when it came to murdering them. That song Piggies will come up in the murders later on as well. But that is another sort of like Beatles influence. So yeah, they murder him and they make it look like it was something to do with the Black Panthers, which is such a shithouse thing to do as well. So like, yeah. Now he died on the floor of his house. He had prayer beads in his hand and he was chanting, I'm going to try and say this right, I only know it from Beatles songs, Namyo Horenge-yo, which is a Buddhist chant, obviously. And that is the story of Gary Hillman, which is really... Hillman is the fucking murderer from Coronation Street. Gary Hinman.
Gruesome.
Awful.
That.
Really awful.
Poor bloke.
And such an escalation.
Gruesome.
But then were they always just committing horrible, like, sordid crimes and this was not a huge step for them? Individually,
They probably wouldn't have done this. Collectively, they're fucking horrendous people.
Really, really bad.
I actually, you know what? I don't think I'll read anything about these once we've done these episodes, because it pisses me off so much.
Really?
Yeah, I find them deeply unpleasant.
Yeah, they're not nice.
to say it lightly. Mm. We come then to... this is where it all kicks off, isn't it?
Yes.
This is the Sharon Tate murder. So we come to the Tate LaBianca murders. These are 2 murders done 2 days consecutively. Now, Sharon Tate, who most people, I would imagine now, would know who she is. Sharon Marie Tate was born in Texas in 1943. She was the eldest of 3 daughters. She was from a military family. Her father, Paul, and her mother, Doris. Now, Doris entered Sharon in beauty pageants from being a very small baby. She won the title of Baby Miss Tiny Tot of Texas, being one of them. You know what, though? I always think, like, about the other daughters. Did they get entered into beauty pageants as well? Or was it just Sharon? It's like, no, that's very much just for Sharon.
Well, weirdly, it does sound like they weren't, even though they sound like it on paper, they weren't pushy parents, but maybe it was just a thing for her to beat people, because when she was growing up, she lived in 6 different cities. So they're constantly, classic army thing, constantly being moved around because of her dad. He was a lieutenant colonel in the US Army. Now, it was her who wanted to do the pageants, because her family were like, yeah, you can do them if you want, but don't worry if you want to stop at any time. And they even moved to Italy, and she won the competitions out there, where I think, like, Italian women are incredibly beautiful.
Oh, no, well, this was American school pageants.
Oh, okay.
So she was at an American school because of her father's military job, and it was American school. She won Homecoming Queen and several other beauty pageants there. But what happened in Italy at the time, a lot of films were made in Italy, Hollywood films, and her and her friends was filming of a movie called Hemingway's Adventures of a Young Man. That was being made nearby. Paul Newman was in it, Susan Strasberg, Richard Beymer. Her and her friends obtained parts of film extras in the movie. Now, Richard Beymer, he noticed Sharon in the crowd, and he introduced himself, smoothly, and they dated during the production of the film. And he actually encouraged Sharon to pursue a film career, because he's like, you look great on camera, I think you could make a career of this. In 1960, she was employed by the singer Pat Boone. She appeared with him in a TV series, episode of the TV series The Pat Boone Chevy Showroom, which was filmed in Venice. 60s were weird, weren't they?
Very weird.
There was another film being made, Barabbas, which was being filmed in Verona. Now, Sharon, again, was hired as an extra. Jack Palance was so impressed by her appearance and attitude. He was like, she's great, but the part she was playing, she was a bit too... The role she had was too small. I can't judge her talent. And he arranged a screen test for her, but she didn't get any further work. She then went to America by herself because she wanted to pursue her studies. But really, she wanted to try and find film work. Her family, obviously, were very concerned about her going on her own, and Doris, her mother, she was concerned about her safety. She had a nervous breakdown and persuaded her to come back to Italy. The family altogether went back to America in 1962. Sharon moves to Los Angeles. She contacts Richard Beymer's agent, Harry Gefsky, and Gefsky meets her and says, yeah, I'm going to represent you, and gets her some work in TV and magazine ads and stuff like that. And in 1963, he introduced her to Martin Ranserhoff, who was director of Filmways, and he signed her to a 7-year contract. And part of this 7-year contract, it was like, we'll make sure you have acting lessons, we'll teach you about the industry, and then what they hoped is that in the 7 years, all the money they'd invested in her would come back double. She was considered for a lot of different roles, and she had small parts in Mr. Ed. I don't know why I'm laughing at Mr. Ed. And the Beverly Hillbillies. And she worked very, very hard, actually, to learn about acting and get better at it. And as soon as she got that studio deal, she really did put the graft in. She had a relationship with a French actor called Philippe Fouquet, and they became engaged in 1963, but it was quite a volatile relationship, and they broke up in 1964. Now, she gets a part in a film called Dance of the Vampires. Who was the director? It was Roman Polanski. Another wrong un, but we'll get to that later. He's not... We feel a bit sorry for him in this, but yeah, he's still a wrong un. I've told you about the dog that used to live near me called Polanski, haven't I?
No.
I'm sure I've mentioned it. There used to be a dog that she used to roam around that belonged to a family near us, and the dog was called Polanski. Now, he said to one of his colleagues, when he first met Sharon, he wasn't sure if she was right for the role, but then he started to think, yeah, she definitely is. He said to one of his colleagues, can you move her from her hotel into my hotel, and can you put her into the room next to me? They were filming it in London for the movie, and she moved in with him very quickly. The press absolutely loved Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate. They were a very 60s couple, bit unconventional, but very swinging 60s. Unconventional as well, in the sense of that he was a massive cheat and she ignored it. That was one of the things that went on. Now, they got married in 1968. Roman Polanski said there was more photographers at the wedding than guests, and the reception was in the Playboy Lounge Club.
Well, that she has a relationship with Playboy, and they're sort of quite, not instrumental, but there was loads of, just before she got married, so like 1967, there was this sort of, you know when someone's got a buzz around them, they're having like a buzzy year, that was her. So everyone was like, oh my God, she's been really good and stuff, she's worked really hard, now she's going to marry this guy. And it was Playboy who ran an article that said 1967 was to be the year that Sharon Tate happens. So she was being sort of touted for greatness. I sense that if she hadn't have been murdered, we would still know, she would be even more famous to us now.
Yeah, I think that's hard to tell. I'm not sure, really. He took the photographs as well of her for Playboy. So Roman Polanski took the photographs. They were very much like a cool, arty, swinging 60s couple.
Yeah.
There was lots of... they lived between London and Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, they lived in the Chateau Marmont Hotel. They had lots of friends. There was very much an open door policy. There's people popping by all the time and, you know, hanging out. There was rumours of orgies and drugs as well. Sharon gets nominated for a Golden Globe for her role in Valley of the Dolls as well. And apparently she had a very good sense of humour, because a lot of mostly all of the roles she got put up for were being as an attractive woman. And she used to call herself Sexy Little Me, and she used to refer to Roman as her better half. As I say, it was common knowledge that he was having affairs. He openly admits in his autobiography to making a sex tape with Sharon as well.
Jesus.
No need for that, Roman. You could have kept that to yourself.
Yeah, take that to the grave.
In 1969, she discovers she's pregnant, which becomes very relevant in a bit. She was very, very excited about it. Roman, being the annoying little shit that he is, said he was confused at first. Well, how do you think that happened? But Sharon was very practical, and she said, look, I'm sick of travelling around. I really want to settle down now. We need a house. This is where they get the house in CeeLo Drive in the Hollywood Hills in Benedict Canyon, which was a very young, wealthy neighbourhood. Now, Sharon at this point had been hired for a very good fee, which was more than Roman got for directing Rosemary's Baby. They had a trip to, it was a film called The 13 Chairs. They had a trip to London and Italy because she was filming this movie, and she was very pregnant during the filming, so they had to be very creative. She was very keen to get back to Los Angeles as she wanted to have her child there. The film's director said to her, look, we need to get the edit done, and you're very pregnant. Why don't you have your child here in Italy at the same place that Sophia Loren gave birth? And she was like, no, I really don't want to do that. Now, if she had done that, with hindsight, we wouldn't be talking about this. So she's very heavily pregnant. She goes back to... Roman's still in London. But he says to her, don't worry, I'm just a few days behind you. Now, when he said bye to Sharon, Roman Polanski said he had a horrible sort of feeling and premonition that he wouldn't see her again. Very weird. She spent a lot of time with the family when she goes back to LA. They watched the moon landing. It's all happening in this, isn't it? So her sister tells a really nice story that when they're watching the moon landing in 1969, all the girls, the three girls and the mum, are lying in Sharon's huge bed in sort of, you know, an engine, and the dad just leans on the door because he wouldn't relax. My dad's like that.
Yeah.
Is your dad like that?
Yeah, watching the film stood up, yeah.
Exactly. It's so... Do you know, whenever my dad used to come around to my grandparents' house, I've never saw him sit down in that house. He would stand and lean on the bureau, and my granddad would be constantly like, come on, come and sit down. Oh no, I'm fine, yeah. Never sits down. Dads are so weird, aren't they?
Really
It's just like... I think my dad's like general state is just awkward. The moon landing was the last gathering they ever had as a family, because on the 9th of August 1969, what happens? 4 members of the Manson family turn up at her home. They go into the grounds of the CeeLo Drive home.
Before we start this, can I put this weird detail in here about where she has to get a hairdresser to approve Roman Polanski? So she'd had a series of like dipshit boyfriends.
Yeah.
That French guy, Philippe Fouquet, as if that's how you pronounce his name, that you mentioned. But I mean, that was a horrible relationship where she just was a bit young and they were engaged, and then she ended up in a UCLA medical centre because he was battering her.
Ugh.
So she had quite bad taste in men. But at the end of 1964, she meets a Hollywood hairstylist called Jay Sebrig, and that's a big party is thrown by this whiskey company. Now, they get on really well and just become inseparable. And because he's really wealthy, he treats her very well and gives her sort of like the best of everything. And they would go to restaurants together. They would just do LSD at home together, but they would also go to big parties. And she really likes him, and they really get on. And her parents, which is the first time, really like him as well. And they were like, you know what, this one might be a keeper. So she's getting on, and she's working pretty steadily now. And about this time, she meets Roman Polanski. And so she phones up Jay and says, oh, listen, I'm seeing this guy, and I think he might be the guy I settle down with. So she's in London, and he gets on a plane, goes to London, and is like, I'm going to win you back. And she's like, what? And she's like, I'm going to win you back. This is not the person you're meant to be with. I know the person you're meant to be with. And she's like, no, I really love him. And he was like, all right, I need to meet him and I need to sign him off. And she's like, what? He's like, no, you need a man that's worthy of you. So I'm going to have to approve this guy because you've got shit taste in men. So all 3 of them go for dinner. And at the end of it, he's like, okay, yeah, I approve. You can marry him.
Bit too 60s LSD for me, that. Thank you very much.
Well, it's very straight. Imagine if you had to get your current boyfriend signed off by an ex-boyfriend.
Fucking
Absolute nightmare.
Also, I mean, very misogynistic behaviour. Very controlling behaviour, in my opinion, that. I think there's a whiff of control about that. Yeah.
You know, when they got married, they did the reception in the Playboy Club, but then they went to a Supremes concert, and then they had a honeymoon in the Alps. Genuinely, that sounds like a fucking great wedding.
Sounds pretty good, that, doesn't it, yeah?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that.
Although I have been to Switzerland and didn't enjoy it. Maybe I'd enjoy the Alps, I don't know.
Have we talked about the film where she has to have martial arts lessons from Bruce Lee?
No.
Yeah, she gets a part for Columbia Pictures. She's working on The Wrecking Crew, which is a Matt Helm film. Dean Martin's in it. And she is playing this clumsy agent who's meant to assist
right,
Matt
yeah.
And she has to do a few fight scenes. So Bruce Lee is the one who gives a martial arts lesson. Imagine the money that's cost them, and then the film was a massive flop.
Wow.
But she really enjoyed it, and the press were very kind about her. Even though they're like, the film's shit, but she's great in it.
Yeah, apparently she's quite a good comedy actress, by all accounts.
Yeah. Have we talked about the fact that she kept the pregnancy a secret from him?
I thought she only kept it secret as far as, like, she told her sister first.
No, she thought that he would make her get an abortion. So she kept it to herself until it was too far along for that.
I see.
Which is, again, like, if you're doing that, like, leave him.
Yeah. I don't think I doubt they would have stayed together as a couple.
No.
That's my...
But I think his motivation for not wanting a child is fairly understandable. When he grew up in Poland, it was occupied. He was like, you shouldn't bring children into a world that can be this cruel. It's too violent. It's not right. But after a couple of months, thank God, he mellows and is actually very excited about having a kid.
I have to say as well, I do sort of see quite a few people in a situation in life of, like, one part of the couple says they do not want children, and the other one goes, yeah, no problem. Then a few months down the line, it's like, maybe it's like, you know, if someone says they don't want children, don't fucking push. I think it's a real cunt trick, you know?
Yeah.
If someone is clear when you get into a relationship that, like, I do not want children, and you do, you don't be with them. I think it's they're not going to change their mind. And if they do, it's because you're pressuring them.
And
So
vice versa. I think don't go, oh yeah, no, I would maybe have kids, knowing that you wouldn't.
Yeah, so
That you're
just,
just
you
trying
know.
to stay with him. I think that's a similar thing.
8th of August 1969, Sharon had been with her friend Joanna Patet and had lunch at her home. She was saying that she was disappointed that Roman was, a bit delayed coming back from London. But he rang her that day and he said, don't worry, I'm on my way back. Her younger sister, very specific request. The younger sister Deborah rang and she said, do you mind if we could pick up a saddle that you brought back from Europe? Sure, no. She said, no, we're a bit busy, can you come back and come by another time? Later that evening, they go to the El Coyote Cafe with J.C. Brigg, Wojciech Frykowski and Abigail Folger. And at 10:30 that night, they go back to CeeLo Drive.
J.C. Brigg is that hairdresser that she loves and is still they're still really good friends with. Now, there is rumours amongst her friends once she passes away that she had intended to leave Roman because she knew he was a cheat and she got married and she was like, I don't want to change him, but I'm hoping that I'm a good enough wife that he just changes himself, which of course he doesn't. And she starts to get a bit like, is this my life? Because she finds it really stressful and upsetting that he just keeps cheating on her. So they did talk about the fact that there were plans to leave him, but she never gets the chance to.
Yes. 3 of the Manson family. Which 3 was it?
Susan Atkins, it was Tex, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian was sat in the car outside.
They're just sitting around, being all 60s, chatting. And these members of the Manson family sneak around, doing their thing that they're called creepy crawling, and they cut the phone lines and get into the house. These are horrible murders. There is a chap called Stephen Parent who was just shot dead in the car in the driveway because he just happened to be there as well.
That is, he's the world's most unlucky man.
I know.
Basically goes to visit and is walking away. And don't forget that the reason why they ended up in that house is because it used to be Terry Melcher's house, who refused to accept that Charles Manson had any sort of musical prowess. So that they knew that Roman Polanski lived there now with Sharon Tate, and that's why they went back, because also they knew the house very well, because they had lived there for months and months. It's just so grim. It's this poor man, isn't he just like a housekeeper?
I think he's a friend of the caretaker, isn't he?
Yeah.
Who just popped by.
And he's walking away and just immediately gets murdered.
So they get, it's just awful. Bear in mind, Sharon Tate is heavily pregnant at this time. Apparently, from what we know, everyone was like, oh, fuck.
So they cut the phone line. It's about midnight. And so what they do is, because there's a big drive that leads up to the place, they reverse the car all the way down to the bottom of the hill. So basically, that it means that they could get a quick getaway. So they park there and then they walk up, because they also thought that the gate into the house might be rigged and it would set off an alarm. So they climbed up this embankment and then dropped into the ground. So they didn't go over through the gate or the fences. And there's these headlights come on, which must have been this poor guy, Stephen. Yes, it was. So poor Stephen is leaving. He's only 18 as well. These headlights come on and Tex is like, lie down here in the bushes and hide. So he steps out onto the road, and then this little guy, Stephen, pulls up and he just... Oh, God. He says, listen, I won't say anything, please just let me go. And he slashes his stomach with a knife. Oh. He has a defensive slash on his hand because he puts it up to sort of protect himself. Now, this Tex guy is obviously crackers on drugs, because he's going so like ferociously with it. He severs the tendons in the guy's hand, and then he shoots him 4 times in the chest and abdomen. So then he was like, right, get out of the bushes, and they push this car up the driveway. Then they cross the front lawn, and then they say to Linda Kasabian, who is the driver, go and look for a window that's open so we can get into the main house. So they find one, and then Tex cuts the screen of it, and he says, you're going to go down to the gate, Linda. You're going to keep watch, and you let us know if anyone comes by or comes up. So she stands by poor dead Stephen's car and is on lookout there. So they sneak into the house, and then he goes around to the front door and lets Patricia Krenwinkel and Susan Atkins in. Now, they were all sort of like, they had kind of, it's 10:30, they've just had dinner, so everyone's in different sort of states. Is that the right thing to say? So Frykowski was in the living room, just falling asleep on the sofa, which it would be me in this situation. Abigail Folger was in her bedroom just reading a book, and then, of course, Sharon and Jay, who have this very intense relationship, are sat talking in her bedroom. And it's just after midnight, and Susan Atkins just wanders into the room with a buck knife. So one for sort of, I think it's for stripping the skin off of animals that you've hunted. And she says to Sharon and Jay, come into the living room. And that's where Tex is. He ties a rope around Jay's neck, and he loops it over the ceiling beam, and then he ties it around Sharon's neck. And so Jay starts kicking off and arguing with Tex, and Tex is like, lie down on your stomach. So they go to do that, and he just immediately shoots Jay. Now, they're all still tied up. Everything starts going mad. Sharon is in floods of tears, is like, please, I have a baby. Like, please let me go, because I'm pregnant. She was visibly pregnant as well. Ugh. It's just so horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's grim.
They're just all fucking awful. Okay.
They found, so they write on the wall as well, in Sharon's blood.
Yes. Well, up until this point, that Sharon is not dead. It's just Jay. Now, when this poor Frykowski is asleep in the living room, he gets booted awake in the head, and he said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And Tex said, "I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business." So everyone's. It's awful, isn't it? Everyone's in this one room. They get being sort of like pushed around. And by the way, the only reason that Jay kicked off is because they were being so rough with Sharon. He's like, listen, she's pregnant. And that's when he shoots him. Now, they go and they get Abigail Folger. They said, go back into your bedroom and get your purse. So she goes back and gets it. And she's only got $70 on that. And then he was like, okay. And he, in front of her, stabs Jay Sebring a further 7 times. So he's already been shot, but this is obviously some like display to scare the others. Now they've tied Frykowski's hands together with a towel to sort of bind him up, but he's been wiggling around and he's managed to get himself free. So he starts fighting with Susan Atkins, but then Susan, it's so chaotic and frenetic, and I imagine just noisy, blood everywhere, screaming. She stabs him in his legs, because she'd had this buck knife that she was guarding him with, so she stabs at his legs, and he nearly gets out of the front door onto the porch, and then Tex joins in and hits him over the head with a gun several times, and then starts stabbing him, and then shot him twice. In fact, he hits him so much over the head with a gun that he breaks the gun's grip. Now, Linda Kasabian is standing by this poor killed 18-year-old Stephen's car, and she suddenly hears these horrifying sounds. She says she goes to the door and she tries to stop them from doing the killing, is what she says. So she goes to Susan, there's somebody coming, I can hear someone coming, thinking that means we're all run away. But that just means that they are like, right, we've got to get everyone murdered before there's any more witnesses. This is so horrible. Abigail Folger had escaped fully now from Patricia Krenwinkel and was just pegging out of the bedroom door because there's a pool area. So she ran onto the front lawn and then grabbed her and stabbed her. And she was stabbed so many times, 51 times in total, which is really awful. And Abigail was stabbed 28 times. This is so horrible. So Sharon is still alive at this point. She's the only one that hasn't been killed yet, and she's like, please, why don't you take me as a hostage? You'll get more money that way. She's just doing everything she can to save her unborn baby. But they were like, nah. Now, no one will admit to killing her. Some say it was Susan Atkins, some say it was Tex, some say it was both at the same time, but whoever it was stabbed her 16 times. And
awful.
It's horrible. And Tex later said that she cried out for her mum as she was being killed. Ugh. Now, Manson had given them the instructions leave a sign. He says something witchy. So they got the towel that they used to...
Is that always something witchy?
Also, it's so weird that it sounds like it's all this has been planned by a master criminal, and then he's like, when it comes to the details, like, yeah, just leave something, I don't know, witchy, something like that.
Yeah, something witchy.
So he takes the towel that had been they take the towel that had been binding Frykowski's legs together, and they put it in Sharon Tate's blood, and they write "pig" on the front door of the house. Now, on the way home, and then they just leave. So on the way home, they get out of their bloody clothes and they throw them in the hills somewhere.
All right, mate, you don't have to swear.
They throw them in the hills somewhere, and they get rid of the weapons as well. Ugh. Now, when it comes to the murder of Sharon Tate, apparently a jailhouse snitch in Sybil Brand Institute, which is where Susan Atkins ends up, says she killed Sharon Tate. But then later, before to her solicitors and a grand jury, she said no, it was Tex who did it. And then in 1978, Tex releases an autobiography.
Oh, fuck.
And he said that he stabbed Tate, and it was Atkins hadn't been anywhere near her. So, yep.
Well, one of them did it.
Yes. Yeah.
Ugh, horrible. They're found the next day
This is
by
so
the
awful.
housekeeper.
Imagine rocking up and being like, what the fucking fuck?
Horrendous. The police are called. They take in the only survivor at the address, the caretaker, William Garrettson, for questioning. He lived in a guest house on the property, short distance, and he was questioned, and he said, the young man who was murdered, parent had visited him, at 11:30 p.m. and left shortly after. He said he had no involvement, needed a polygraph, and he was released. Now, of course, Roman Polanski's still in London. He gets a phone call at 8 a.m. and he's told, listen, something's happened at the house. And he's like, oh, which house? Because I've got several. And he was told that they were all dead, basically. Now, he obviously is in deep shock at this. He starts hitting his head against a wall, and a doctor has to be called and he has to be sedated. One of the most horrible things about this is Sharon Tate's sister was talking about this, and she said her mother told her that Sharon had died. She spoke to a police officer who said it was a murder. They needed someone to identify the body, and obviously she was like, there's no way my mother's going to do this. Her father was away working, so she was going to go and identify the body. But Roman's agent had heard what had happened. He goes to the house and he said, no, I'll ID the bodies, which was a relief for the family. But he had a terrible nervous breakdown after this because of what he saw. Roman Polanski got an emergency visa and had to be tranquilised to fly home. Now, the media were not very helpful. Because of Sharon Tate being in the Dance of the Witches film and Roman Polanski making Rosemary's Baby, they were like, oh, well, there's rumours of witchcraft about this, and the police were at a loss about who did this. Polanski did a voluntary lie detector, and he actually does a press conference. And when you see that press conference, regardless of what you know about Roman Polanski now, you can tell that he's absolutely gutted. He starts doing his own forensic research as well. He gets chemicals that you can, that show up blood on surfaces. He starts going to his friends' cars and garages because he was convinced that this person who did this must have been known to them. Sharon's mother had a nervous breakdown as well. So the impact on people around this... I mean, don't just forget, it's not just Sharon Tate's family. There's other people that were murdered that night. Their families as well. You think about all the people that have been horrendously affected by this. It's awful, isn't it?
Yeah. So
it's huge news. Everyone's talking about it. It's in all the papers.
Do you know who I feel really sorry for?
Go on.
So, you know that William Garrettson, who's the caretaker? So he's just blasting his music. He doesn't hear any of it, which is bizarre. But that poor little... I can't get over that. Not that anyone deserved it. But that Steve Perrin, that 18-year-old who's just going over to a caretaker's house, because he's really into radios. He's just like a little nerd that loves radios, and he's heard that William's got a radio for sale that he quite likes.
Aww.
So imagine your 18-year-old kid being like, can I borrow the car? As a radio I want. And you're like, yeah, go on then. Make sure you're back by 10. And this fucking kid gets slashed
horrible, isn't it?
and shot just because these absolute fucking hippie maniacs. Oh my God, it is just all so awful.
I genuinely, I think this lot, as I say, I don't think I'll read anything about or watch anything about these after this, because I genuinely detest them.
Yeah.
I think they're awful. Whilst everyone's chatting about this horrendous murder, which is widely reported because of Sharon Tate being one of the victims and Roman Polanski being her husband, everyone's chatting about it. It's in all the papers. People are, saying we can't believe this has happened. People are, thinking, who could it be? The very next day, it happens again. So this is the 10th of August 1969. This is Reno and Rosemary LaBianca. Now, they'd heard about the Tate murders. They'd read the papers, they'd seen the news reports, and they were like, well, this is awful. What could be going on? These people were not known to anyone. Like, they were a normal couple. Now, Charles Manson said to his little gang of cronies, he said, listen, last night was too messy. I'm going to show you how to do it. Right? So, the victims, Lino LaBianca, his name was Pasqualino Antonio LaBianca. He was born on the 6th of August 1925. He was murdered just 4 days after his 44th birthday. He was a son of Italian-American immigrants. He worked in a grocery store industry, He'd served in World War II. He married his childhood sweetheart. They had 3 children, but they'd grown apart. They get divorced. He meets Rosemary. They get married in Las Vegas in 1959 or 1960, around that time. Rosemary had a bit more unconventional. She may have been born in Mexico in 1930. She'd lived in an orphanage in Arizona until she was 12, and she was adopted by a Californian couple. Now, like Leno, she'd been married and had children, but in 1958 she was also divorced. So in 1969, they had sort of a mixed family, which had become, increasingly more normal in America as attitudes about divorce had sort of changed. Leno continued to work in the grocery industry. Rosemary co-founded a high-end clothing store. They were a happy family. They often spent time with each other's children. Their children at this point were teenagers and young adults as well. So they were a happy family. Quite a modern family for the times as well. Now, the day before the murder, they'd spent the day with Rosemary's 2 children, Frank and Susan. They'd driven up to Lake Isabella to collect Frank, who was 16. He was at a friend's house there. And he said, oh, please, can I just stay one more day? I'm having a good time. And they were like, okay. So they drive Susan back to her apartment in Los Angeles, and they go back to their house, which is 3301 Waverly Drive. And this is in the Los Feliz neighbourhood. They'd moved in just the year before, and it was Leno's childhood home as well. How awful. I mean, isn't it bizarre that... Have you heard the thing that people say, by the time you get in your 30s, it's more like you're likely to have visited the place that you'll die?
For fuck's sake. I can't be arsed with that.
How dark is that?
I hate that. I mean,
I've travelled all around the UK. I just hope it's not Birmingham.
I absolutely hate that statistic.
Isn't it awful? Basically what it means is it's probably a hospital.
Yeah, that's true.
So they drop Susan off. They stop off to get some gas or petrol. I can't do that, I've got to say petrol. Stop and get some petrol. They then pick up a copy of the Herald Examiner at a newsstand belonging to John Focianos. Now, Leno was a regular customer of John's, and they all chatted for a few minutes about the news of the day, which was the Tate murders. Now, Rosemary seemed concerned about the murders, but, nothing like, oh, this could happen to us. So they left. John said they left around between 1am and 2am. Now, earlier that year, this is such a creepy, horrible... It makes me go a bit goosey, this, because it really gives me the fucking willies, right? They'd actually contacted the police earlier that year because Rosemary had said she thought there was something going on in the house, in this home that they'd bought. Objects were being moved. The dogs were in when they'd been put out and vice versa. Now, the police weren't overly concerned, but people were like, after the event, could it have been that the Manson lot were doing their creepy crawly thing?
Oh, God.
Where they'd go in and move things and change things round.
Well, because...
I mean, to phone the police about that, it must have been pretty noticeable.
Yeah, and also they had... The Manson family had driven round an awful lot that night trying to find... Charles Manson wanted sort of the right people to murder. So they drove around for hours, and he was like, maybe we'll do here, maybe we'll do there. And then he was like, I know where we're going. And the house that they had on Waverley Drive was next door to a house that they had been to before because they'd been to a party the previous year. But I think the fact that he sort of walked up so quickly and was like, is this one? Means that they were already familiar with the house. Definitely.
Yes, I definitely think so as well. Because it's just too much of a coincidence that she would have phoned the police about it. The police were like, oh, we don't think there's anything wrong here. The Biancas, they went to bed in the early hours. Leno had stayed up reading the sports pages. Rosemary goes to bed. She's upstairs. And of course, Charles Manson and his little creepy mate Tex, they're the first people to enter the house.
Well, apparently there's sort of like... there's differentiating accounts of whether Charles goes up to the house and then comes back and says, they're tied up, come on up. Or what most people agree is that Charles comes down and says, there's a man sleeping and we can get to him. And then he and Tex go up to the house. And this is when, imagine this poor fucking guy. Leno is just asleep in his living... Like, is there any greater injustice than to wake someone up who's happily dozing in their living room?
Ugh.
It's so horrible. And yeah,
so frightening.
They wake them up and it sort of jolts him awake, basically, and holds a gun to his head. And that's when he gets tied up by Tex.
Oof.
And then they bring Rosemary into the living room, just very briefly. Now, Tex has been told by Charles Manson, cover their heads with pillowcases. That's, I don't know, assuming that, it'll make less mess. They won't have to look at them when they shoot them. But also, if they get away, then they are less likely to have seen them. So he binds them in place with lamp cords. And then Charles Manson leaves. And he sends Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten into the house and says, make sure that they're both killed.
What a fucking cunt, this man. I hate him. I hate them all.
Horrible, isn't he? Which is why we have never covered him as a serial killer, because it's that whole thing of, like, he has a body account attached to him, but not necessarily by him.
I cannot stand any of them.
Now, Tex had been complaining to Charles Manson about, the other night's weapons were rubbish and, we had to make do. So there's this whole thing of the weapons aren't good enough. So he, on his way out, Charles Manson goes to the women, go to the kitchen and see if you can find it, and see if you can find anything in there.
That's the one relief that I'd have at my house if somebody broke in and was going to stab me. They wouldn't find a sharp knife at all in that kitchen. They would be slitting my throat with a butter knife. If any, the biggest crime would be my cutlery and tools to hand.
Well, this is where the kitchen comes into it, because later on they will use forks. I mean, they had been given better weapons, in inverted commas. So Leno is stabbed with a chrome-plated bayonet.
Fucking
and they start... This is so horrible. They cut his throat first. Then suddenly they hear a scuffle in the bedroom, which is where Rosemary's been taken back to, and this is incredible. Rosemary is keeping the woman away from her who's guarding her. I don't know which one it is, whether it's Van Houten or Krenwinkel. Is the lamp that's tied around her neck, she's like swinging it at her. Oof. Isn't that mad? So she's just like swinging this lamp, being like, get away from me. But she gets bayoneted by Tex, and she's obviously like collapses, and then he goes back to attacking her husband. Now he's stabbed 12 times with a bayonet. Ugh. And he carved war onto his abdomen. Again, this is part of Manson's Leave Something Witchy. Now I think it's mad, by the way, that Tex has an autobiography.
Yeah, 100. I mean, is it out for sale, or is it just something he's written?
Yeah.
Fuck that.
So he stated in his autobiography, there's loads of stuff I've read everywhere that's like, oh, in his autobiography, but in his autobiography he says, So there's loads of contradictions between what the people tell the grand jury, what he says in his autobiography, what they say at the time, what
I think what we should say as well,
say.
Rosemary was stabbed 41 times.
Yes, we haven't quite got to her murder yet because it's a fucking horrible. Strap in for it. He says that it was Patricia Krenwinkel who'd carved war into his chest. But also, like, that's not the bad bit. Like, it's not the word war. I think most people could survive the World War, pushed into your chest. It's the fact that you stabbed them 20-odd times. So they go back to the bedroom where Rosemary is, and Patricia Krenwinkel is stabbing her with a knife that she's got from the kitchen. Now, they also use, according to another account, they use knives and forks as well, because this goes back to the Beatles again. The White Album, Piggies, there's a song that refers to forks and knives. Now, she had 41 knife wounds altogether, and Leno had 12 knife wounds and 7 fork wounds.
Ugh.
So they think that this is a way of tying it to the song, especially because they write death to pigs on the wall of their house as well. This is so fucking grim. They also write the words rise as well, which is obviously very significant. And then on the fridge, they'd written the words helter skelter on the front of the fridge. They then take sort of a break and then have some milk and sandwiches that they make from their fridge.
I fucking hate them.
Yeah.
I fucking hate them.
It's really, really, really horrible. They're just rank. The whole lot of them are just unforgivably rank.
Yeah. Awful people.
Now, there's a post-mortem of poor Rosemary's body. Now, most of the wounds, they say, had been inflicted post-mortem because she'd been stabbed 16 times in the back and her bum as well that they got out. But they think that was done as like an extra after she died to, excuse me, to sort of humiliate her. Ugh. I can't believe that they just ate afterwards. I don't know why.
I can.
Because they're horrible.
The worst, one of the worst bits as well is Rosemary and Leno's bodies were found by their children the next day. They found Leno in the living room with a pillowcase covering his head, a cord around his neck, and his hands tied behind his back. Behind his back with a leather thong. Rosemary was on the bedroom floor wearing one of her favourite dresses, and the dress was bunched up over her head, exposing a naked body. Now, it's just the worst, isn't it? In the interim of this, Charles Manson, he gives Linda Kasabian the LaBianca's wallet, and he says to her, do us a favour, go and throw this into a predominantly black neighbourhood, because when they find it, hopefully it'll be linked to the Black Panthers. Then he changes his mind the last minute. He says, do you know what, actually, just go and leave it in the women's toilets. And he wanted it left where it could be found, but she didn't do that. She was getting a bit frightened at this point, thinking, oh, fucking hell, I've just been implicated in 2 absolute massacres in 48 hours. She hides it in the water tank. It's actually found 4 months after the killings. The police...
They were trying to do another crime that night.
Fucking hell.
Manson went to Linda Kasabian and says, you've got that mate who's an actor who lives in Venice. Obviously Venice in California. He was like, let's go and dispatch another piggy. So she's like, oh my fucking God. So she takes another group of 3 of the family members to the guy's apartment block, and Charles Manson drives back to the ranch, which means that the La Bianca killers had to hitchhike home, which is fucking mad. Now, Linda Kasabian does a good thing here. She knows exactly what flat her friend lives in, but she knocks on a different one.
Oh, that's very nice of her, because when it affects Linda Kasabian, then she can fucking have a bit of compassion and mislead a bit. But it's when it affects Linda Kasabian can do the right fucking thing, can't she?
Well, I mean, yes, but there is a sort of rumour that she tried to stop the other one, but yeah, I don't know. So she knocks on the wrong door, and then a stranger wakes up and was like, what the fuck do you want? And she was like, nothing. And she was like, it was the wrong place, we haven't got the right one. So they were like, oh, let's just go back home. But before they leave, in the stairway of the apartment block, Susan Atkins takes a shit in the stairwell. Great.
Well, it's a very common thing, though. I've said this before, haven't I?
Isn't it adrenaline? It must be, right?
Yeah. sort of a lot of burglaries that happens. I imagine in murders as well that happens as well.
You might be able to hear my cat yowling in the background. So the room I'm in, it's a very weird setup because it's sort of like an old bit of the house. There's a window at the end of it which looks out into what is just like the little room that we keep the shoes in, like your porch or whatever. So I'm sort of talking about this murder downstairs on my own, and then all of a sudden I see a pair of eyes. It's my cat who's got into that room, I don't know how, and is now staring at me and yowling because he wants his breakfast, and it's fucking freaked me out.
Oh, God. That's me, though. I'm starving now. I might start doing that.
That's the murders. Do we want to do a separate one on the investigation of the trial? How are we going to do it?
We're going to have to. What we should say is the police didn't link the killings initially, but the public were like, I think it's the same person. People were very scared at this point. They were carrying guns more than usual. They were getting alarms, guard dogs. Loads of very famous people were like, I've got to up my security. And then 3 months later, after the LaBianca murder, by chance, the family are caught. And that will be episode 57,000.
This is ridiculous. I can't. I mean, how many parts was the Yorkshire Ripper?
I can't even. I think it was it 4? I can't remember now.
I thought it was like 6 in the end.
What I will tell you right now, you know how much I hate the trial. I'm dreading this next episode.
I'll do it.
Dreading.
It's all the stuff afterwards where they've all gone on to write books or be let free or whatever.
Well, I'm going to have some strong opinions on this. So,
it's not like you have strong opinions.
Yeah, well. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Blwyddyn newydd dda.
Is someone at your door?
There must be, but I can't see them.
It's not Charles Manson, is it?
Well, I do feel slightly freaked out, Rachel, that there was a pair of eyes watching me. And then all of a sudden, oh my God.
What was that? Everything all right?
Oh, yeah, fucking hell. Jesus fucking Christ. This fucking podcast can be the death of me. So there's a pair of eyes at the window. Now they've gone. Then the dog started going mad. And then I was telling you about it. And I was looking at the window the eyes are at. And I turned round. And I could just see a figure at the side of me. And it's my partner.
Oh, thank God.
New, sort of like 1950s themed pyjamas. I stood at the door but in the shadows.
Oh, God.
Fucking hell. Right, well, that's knocked about 45 minutes off my life.
A very drama school ending for us there. I quite enjoyed that. Happy New Year. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Here's to a lovely, prosperous 2023. We hope you remain safe and happy and healthy. Oh my fucking God. Unlike my dog who I'm going to murder. Who is this now? Wait, it's my sister-in-law. Right, I'm going to go. I don't know what's going on here.
All right. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
See you soon. Bye.